Hi, I'm Jeb Butler of the Butler Law Firm. Today we'll talk about wrongful death cases and what lawyers can do and what we can't do. Now, the first thing that a lawyer in a civil law firm that practices personal injury law like we do can do in a wrongful death case is recover money. And it may sound a little bit crass to start talking about money in the context of someone's death. But it can make a real difference. A lot of people are breadwinners. They bring back money for their families. Other people do other services around the house, what we call household services. They have to be done after that person is gone, if there's no one to cut the grass or wash the dishes anymore. Other times, people depart and leave an emotional hole in the middle of their family that requires other people to step up and do things they weren't doing before. You can't bring a person back, and we'll get to that in the can't do column, but money really can help. And that's something that the civil justice system or the tort system does offer. One thing that civil lawyers like us cannot do in a wrongful death case is incarcerate people. Criminal law and civil law are different things. If someone's going to jail to be incarcerated, that is a criminal case. And all criminal cases are brought by the government in its discretion, either the state government or the county, the prosecutor, or a federal prosecutor. They can decide to prosecute someone, and that can end up with incarceration. But that's not something a private personal injury lawyer like me is able to do. Another thing that civil lawyers can do is help to set up the estate of the decedent. In other words, we can help to set up the legal mechanism by which money and assets get distributed. Sometimes people have a will, often they don't. But when they pass, one question arises, and that's who gets what of the person's things and of any monetary recovery in the civil case. So that's something we can do, is help to set up the estate, because the law does give guidelines. They get a little complicated at times, but the law gives pretty clear guidelines about who gets what. Another thing that lawyers cannot do in a wrongful death case is this. And I chose the word restore, but what I mean is bring things back to the way they were before. We can't obviously bring back the dead. And in a greater sense, we can't sometimes bring back the peace that existed before someone was killed. We can do some things to help, but that sort of emotional trauma is hard to heal from. And that's something that families have to go through on their own. The legal system cannot help with that. Another thing lawyers can do in a wrongful death case, and this sometimes does bring some measure of peace, or at least closure, is investigate. We get a surprising number of calls of people who lost a loved one in circumstances that they don't completely understand. Maybe they don't know what really went on at that hospital that their loved one never walked out of. Or maybe they wonder what happened out there on the streets in this collision. This is something we can do. The civil discovery process and the use of experts and forensic evidence can go a long way to investigating and figuring out what happened, which sometimes does bring some measure of closure to grieving families. And there's one more thing, and I'm going to write it in the middle because it's a sometimes thing. And the word is systemic. We get some calls from people who want to make a systemic change to make sure that something never happens again. And in some cases, we really can't help with that. I'm thinking of product liability cases, for instance, where a product is designed in an awful way and it puts people at risk, and victims or the families of victims will say, I don't want another family to go through this, I want systemic changes. And if you can make the manufacturer have to pay a verdict or a judgment or a settlement sometimes that makes a systemic change. We see it also, I'm thinking of a hospital chain we had where the hospital was not providing the care that they claimed to be providing. I mean, they were just lying about it. And then afterward, would even falsify records. So there, in a case like that, often our client wants to make systemic changes. And if you make a hospital chain or a product manufacturer, someone else, or a trucking company change the way they operate because you hurt them in the bottom line, well then that can make some systemic changes.